"If you can resurrect that painting," Vivian Kane said, her voice low and deliberate, "I'll let you steal me away." The words lingered in the corridor like the scent of old varnish, provocative, impossible, and not meant to be taken at face value. Her heels ticked a measured rhythm along the marble floor of the museum's restoration wing, a private artery after closing washed in amber light and the hush that follows a long day. She didn't slow until she reached the cracked canvas leaning on a rolling rack, a ghost of a girl half remembered in ochres and smoke blue. The myth the catalog still called Vermeer's Lost Girl. The man, crouched beside the frame, didn't look up. Broad-shouldered, late 30s, dark hair in need of a comb, he held a tiny brass key in a pair of steady hands, tightening a loosened corner like he was setting a bone. His security badge said maintenance. His movements said otherwise. "You hear me?" Vivian asked, tilting her head. "Or do I need to put it in writing?" He lifted his eyes. They were an arresting gray-green that didn't belong to a maintenance closet sea glass in a winter sky. "I heard you," he said. "But paintings like this aren't copied. They're remembered." "Remembered," she echoed, tasting the word. Interesting verb, from a man with a torque wrench. He set the key down, rose without hurry, and stepped to the rack. One palm hovered over the paint film, steady, respectful, not touching. "This surface was layered wet on wet," he murmured. You can see where the hand hesitated at the jawline, then corrected with a warmer glaze. Whoever started this understood the light, but not the patience. Vivian's gaze sharpened. People bluffed in boardrooms and art fairs all the time. They didn't bluff like this. "You've studied the X-rays." He almost smiled. "No X-rays. My eyes still work." She folded her arms, the silk cuff of her blouse catching the glow. "Then consider this a professional provocation. If you can bring her back, really back, not a showroom facsimile, I'll take the piece insured, give it pride of place, and I'll let you sign it. Your name." Not the museum's. A throat cleared behind them. Walter Avery, Sr. Registrar with a spine like a level and a tie that never wrinkled, stepped into the light. "Ms. Kane, we don't barter signatures in this building," he said. "Cool as climate control, and Mr. Moore's job is facilities, not fine art." "Mr. Moore," she repeated, eyes never leaving the man. "So, you do have a name?" "Everyone does," he said. "Some of us just use fewer of them." Walter's jaw tightened. "Elias is here to stabilize frames and cases per conservation protocol. He's not authorized to touch the paint," Elias finished gently. "I know." Vivian let the silence breathe. She'd spent years buying paintings, branding exhibitions, curating illusion. She knew a room when it bent around someone. It was bending now toward the man in the maintenance badge who talked like a studio ghost. "I'm not asking you to touch it tonight," she said. "I'm asking if you can tell the difference between restoring a story and counterfeiting one." He considered that, hands sliding into the pockets of his work pants. "Counterfeiting is trying to be seen," he said. "Resurrection is trying to see." Vivian's mouth curved. "You talk like a painter, and you talk like someone who used to be." That landed. She tried not to let it show. "I still am," she said lightly. "Just differently. I build frames around other people's color. Frames are still boxes," he said, "even when they're gold." Walter cut in impatient now. "Ms. Kane, the museum appreciates your philanthropy, but there are procedures. A Vermeer lost, or otherwise, requires vetted hands." Vivian didn't look away from Elias. "What do you require?" He glanced at the canvas, then at the door at the end of the corridor, the one with the glass insert that reflected them all in skewed miniature. A quiet room. A week of nights. No cameras. His eyes flicked back to hers. And no promises. She smiled, small and dangerous. "I don't do promises. I do outcomes." "Outcomes are promises with lipstick," he said. She laughed, an unguarded sound surprise slipping past her guard. "So you can be charming." "It's not a skill," he said. "It's a side effect." Walter sighed as if someone had smudged a label. "This is irregular." Walter, Vivian said finally, turning to him. "Irregular is where art lives, and where lawsuits begin. Only if you forget the difference between love and theft." Walter stared, then shook his head. "I'm noting my objection in the log." "You do that," she said pleasantly, and looked to Elias again. Well, he didn't make her wait. "No," he said. "It hit harder than a lecture." "No," she repeated. "No," he said again. "I don't paint anymore." And yet, she said, nodding to his hands, "You can't stop seeing." "That's different." "How seeing doesn't make you responsible," he said. "Painting does." For a moment, the corridor held only the hum of the HVAC and a clock far off in administrative. Vivienne studied him, how still he could be without freezing, how his gaze didn't flinch when told it could have everything. "Who told you you're not responsible if you don't paint?" she asked softly. He looked past her to the canvas again. "Grief," he said. "She's very persuasive." Vivienne felt that in her sternum. Felt, too, the old studio itch in her palms, the arrangement of light and shadow around a human face. "You're not the only one she's persuaded," she said. "But she doesn't get the last word unless we give it to her." "I'm not negotiating with a ghost," he said. "I'm keeping the living alive." Walter checked his watch with an audible click. "Ms. Kane, security sweep in 5. Vivienne straightened. She didn't beg. Not for deals, not for donors, not for color. "My number's on file," she said, "if you change your mind." He didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. At the door, she paused. "One more question, Mr. Moore." He raised an eyebrow. "If you did paint again," she said, "what's the first color you'd reach for?" He didn't blink. "The one I can't mix anymore." "And what's that?" He let a small private smile lift one corner of his mouth. "You'll know it when you see it." She carried that sentence with her down the hall like a pocketed stone. Outside, the city had the wet shine of a late rain. Vivienne's driver idled at the curb, scrolling a phone. She waved him off, chose to walk past sleeping storefronts and the black glass of the museum wings, her reflection a moving painting in the panes. She stopped under a street lamp and opened her own phone, framing a picture through the restoration window slats, the half-face on the rack, the maintenance man in silhouette, the registrar, a rigid line. She typed, then deleted. Typed again. Remembered, not copied. She didn't post it. Back upstairs, she rode the executive elevator to the penthouse office the museum loaned her brand for gala, weeks of perks she rarely used except to watch the city think. On the credenza lay the proofs for campaign luxury fabrics draped on bodies like sculpture captions about legacy and light. She picked up a proof, then set it down. For the first time in months, it looked loud and thin at once. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant, late but still vigilant. "Board wants confirmation on Saturday set. And Ms. Kane. You were trending last week for wearing sneakers. I know you don't care, but marketing does." Vivienne smiled without humor. Noted. "Tomorrow, remind me to care." She went to the window, pressed her palm to the cold glass, and answered the question she hadn't let herself ask in years. "If you could step back into the studio even once, would you?" The answer rose like heat. She ignored it. In a 2-bedroom walk-up 8 blocks away, Elias Moore stood at a sink, rinsing varnish dust from his hands until the water ran clean. He dried them on the hem of a dish towel with little strawberries printed along the edge, then double-checked the hallway, listened. A small pair of feet padded toward him. "Did you fix the squeaky frame?" a voice asked, too bright for the hour. He turned. Isla, 8, and stubborn hair a comet's tumble, wore pajama pants with planets and a t-shirt that declared in glitter, "Color is a verb." She squinted at him like a tiny detective. "You smell like the museum." "Do I?" he said. "Mm-hmm." She climbed onto a chair at the tiny table, snagging a cracker from an open sleeve. "The museum smells like pennies and lemon soap and whispers." He smiled. "You have a very expensive nose." "Thank you," she said gravely, then slid her sketchbook across the table. "Look." He did. A girl's head in profile, the line, sure in places, searching in others. Isla had an uncanny instinct for where a curve wanted to go. It made him both proud and terrified. "That's good," he said. "Who is she?" Isla shrugged. "She just showed up." She glanced at his hands. "You washed all the color off again." "That's the rule," he said. "No paint in bed." She wrinkled her nose. "Boring rule. Necessary rule." She flipped to a blank page tongue caught in the corner of her mouth and began laying in a simple oval. Then she paused. "Can I see your phone?" she asked, mischief tugging. "Why?" "So I can call the pizza place and tell them they put the green stuff on the wrong side last time." "You already did that," he said. "They remember you." "Good," she said. "People should remember important things." She hopped off the chair and padded to the counter anyway, where his phone lay buzzing with a silent message. Isla never snooped. Tonight she reached for it, then froze. "Daddy," she whispered. "Is that the museum?" He dried his hands again without thinking. "Probably Walter." "No," she said, lifting the phone to him, eyes wide and glassy in the dim kitchen light. "It's a picture. From a lady. She has shiny shoes." She pointed, zooming with practiced thumbs. "Hey, I know that face." Elias took the phone. On the screen, framed slyly through a slatted window, a half-lit canvas looked back the ghost of a girl emerging from smoke blue, and beside her a shadow that might have been his. Isla went very still. "That's the color she breathed. What color?" She stepped closer to the screen finger hovering over the faded iris on the canvas. "Mom's eyes," she said matter-of-fact and broken at once. "You forgot how to mix it, but it's right there." Elias felt the floor tilt beneath him, gentle and merciless. Isla looked up a tiny furrow between her brows. "Daddy?" He swallowed. The room smelled like dish soap and strawberries and something opening he hadn't invited. Outside, the city hummed. "Can we go see her?" Isla asked. "The girl in the picture." "Before my eyes get tired again." Elias stared at the photo, then at his daughter, then at the sink where his hands had just learned to be clean. He didn't know why he spoke the truth, but he did. "Yes," he said, "we can." Isla's smile arrived like morning. "Good," she said, hopping down, "because someone has to keep the color from running away." She padded toward her bedroom, then turned in the doorway, her voice suddenly feather-light. "You can mix it again, you know," she said. "You just have to remember who you were when you loved it." The door clicked. The apartment exhaled. Elias stood in the quiet, the phone screen dimming in his palm until the ghost girl vanished and his reflection stared back. Remembered, not copied. He turned the phrase over and felt for the first time in years the weight of a brush in his hand. The museum looked different in daylight, less cathedral, more engine room. Carts rolled, radios crackled, and somewhere a school group spilled laughter like marbles. Elias stood at the staff entrance holding Isla's hand, feeling the pulse in her small wrist like a metronome he couldn't adjust. "Is she going to look at all the paintings?" Isla asked, tipping her face to the polished ceiling. "Because my eyes do medium with portraits, but terrible with taxidermy." "We're not going to the galleries," he said, smiling despite himself. "We're stopping by the restoration wing." Then, "The doctor." She narrowed her eyes. "The eye doctor who says big words and has stickers that smell like grapes." "That one," he said. "Be kind." "I'm always kind," she said. Then added like a lawyer, except to mushrooms. They flashed their visitor passes at security and wound through the back-of-house maze of beige corridors and loading docks. When the restoration door buzzed open, the air changed cooler, drier, the scent of paper and old oil and careful time. Walter Avery looked up from a ledger as if his spine could hear them coming. "Mr. Moore," he said, checking the clock without looking at it. "You're off shift." "I'm a father," Elias said. "That's a 24-hour position." Walter's gaze softened by half a degree. It was the most he gave anyone. "We have a policy about minors in restricted spaces." "I'm not a minor," Isla announced. "I'm a limited edition." Walter blinked. The corner of his mouth did something that might one day become a smile. "1 minute," he said, and led them down the short corridor. Vermeer's Lost Girl waited on the rolling rack like a secret too large to keep. In the bright, even light, the canvas held both authority and apology. The girl's half-formed face seemed to listen. Isla stepped close and then closer still until her breath fogged a ghost on the plexi screen that protected the paint. "She looks like she's trying not to blink," she whispered. "Don't touch the," Walter began. "I'm not touching," Isla said without moving her head. "I'm agreeing." Elias watched his daughter's pupils adjust the tiny muscles in her face, working hard to make sense of shadows. A law of physics lived in parenting: the smaller the hand you hold, the heavier the world you carry, Daddy, Isla murmured. That blue. She pressed her fingertips together in air like she was pinching a thread. It's almost the thing we can't make. Elias felt that thread pull through him. Almost, he said. Walter glanced at him. The donor tour is at 11, he said, as if schedules could protect anyone from feeling. We should... We're going, Elias said. Before they turned, Isla leaned in one last time. I won't forget you, she told the painted girl, so don't forget the light. In the elevator down to street level, Isla rested her head against Elias's arm. Do you think she knows she's not finished? She asked. I think she's waiting for someone to tell her she can be. Is that your job? Isla said. Or mine? He kissed the top of her hair. Maybe both. Dr. Meera Patel's office faced a row of bare ginkgo trees. In the winter light, the room looked like a promise kept clean. Dr. Patel had a voice that belonged in lullabies and a way of listening that made entire families exhale. We'll take it step by step, she said after the first set of tests, spinning gently on her stool. Isla, you did wonderfully. Isla swung her sneakered feet. I didn't cry even when the drops went in. You didn't, Dr. Patel agreed. You asked if they had a blueberry flavor. We're working on it. Blueberry eye drops would sell, Isla said. Kids are my demographic. Dr. Patel smiled, then turned to Elias, and the smile became a steady line. I know you know the basics, she said, but I want to say it out loud for both of you. The pigment cells in the back of Isla's eyes are under stress. That's why some colors blur and some edges get soft. It isn't her fault. It isn't anything you did or didn't do. Good, Isla said. Because I've been very busy not doing homework. Dr. Patel winked. The good news, we can act. The sooner the better. How soon? Elias asked, the words already thinner than he wanted. We're looking at a surgical intervention in a matter of weeks, not months, Dr. Patel said. The procedure is safe in experienced hands. The sooner we stabilize, the more of the color spectrum she retains. We'll assemble the team and we'll talk through every step. I'll be with you and I'll be honest. Isla raised her hand like a student who couldn't wait. Will I still see Dad's face after? Yes, Dr. Patel said warmly. And if he finally smiles with his teeth, you'll see that too. Elias let out a surprised breath that almost laughed. Dr. Patel handed Isla a sheet of paper with a color grid. Homework, she said. Not the boring kind. We'll map which shades are easiest now and see how that changes. You're going to help me measure progress. Am I your assistant? Isla asked, sparks in her eyes. My partner, Dr. Patel said. Back in the hall, scheduling and consent forms stacked up like small cliffs. Numbers, insurance language, time slots. The practical weight of hope. Elias filled what he could, fielded what he couldn't, and shook hands like a man at the edge of a new continent. At the elevator, Isla looked up at him, her voice low. Does it cost as much as a spaceship? More, he said, because he didn't lie to her. She considered that, then nodded as if tallying stars. Okay, she said. We'll need a better piggy bank. We will, he said, and maybe she added, making it casual a painting. He met her eyes. There it was, the thing she had that the world couldn't teach. The direct route to the truth. Maybe, he said. Vivian Kane didn't believe in fate. She believed in calendars. But that afternoon, she was in a midtown conference room presenting a sponsorship deck to a table of executives whose suits made their faces look bored when her phone lit with a photo sent by the museum's registrar. Walter never texted during meetings. He preferred letters carbon copied in triplicate. The image was an accident. She knew some automated log image, a timestamp meant for internal files. But it might as well have been a telegram. A little girl stood in front of Vermeer's lost girl chin, lifted hands clasped behind her back as if someone had taught her reverence. A man's shadow fell across the floor beside her. Vivian's heart did something it rarely did in public. It changed tempo. Ms. Kane, someone at the table said, Your slide. She clicked the remote and watched numbers climb a wall while her mind replayed the look on the man's face the night before when he said, Seeing doesn't make you responsible. Painting does. Deliverables are fine, a CFO said. But can we add a celebrity host for the season opener? It needs heat. Vivian smiled coolly. I don't buy heat, she said. I build it. The table murmured. She closed the deck and closed the conversation, then excused herself with the easy authority of a woman who didn't ask permission to leave a room. In the quiet of the hallway, she opened another photo, a screenshot this time from a blog she never admitted reading, Back of House Lives Behind the Galleries. A headline perched above a candid shot of a man carrying a ladder across the museum's West Hall. The quiet ones who keep it standing. There he was again, a silhouette at the margin. Vivian let the image rest in her palm like a question. What do you do when a life you left behind sends you a person who remembers what you forgot? She didn't answer. She sent a message instead. Thursday, 10 p.m. Quiet room. No cameras, if you want it. She didn't add, please. The world had trained that out of her. She also didn't add why her hands were shaking. Elias cooked dinner with the focus of a man following a map. He could do this part. Heat salt structure. Isla sat at the table with Dr. Patel's grid and a box of pencils calling out colors like a weather report. Today, reds are bossy, she said. Blues are being shy. Yellow is yellow. Yellow is always loud. Yellow doesn't whisper, he agreed. She squinted at a square that should have been jade. This one looks like the word I can't spell. Which word? The one that means you hope with your whole face. He glanced up. You mean believe? No, she said, wrinkling her nose. Bigger, like when you throw your arms at the sky, even if it rains. Faith, he offered, then shook his head. No, not that. Maybe it's just green, she said, and colored it in with a decisive hand. After she ate half a grilled cheese and all the crust, she climbed into his lap as she had when she was 3, and the world felt like a hill he could carry. Is Dr. Patel nice when she's sleepy? She asked into his shirt. I think Dr. Patel is nice even in her dreams, he said. Then I'm not scared, Isla said. I'm only curious. That's a good way to be. She tipped her head back to look at him. You can be both, you know. Scared and brave. I checked. He swallowed. Who told you? My stomach and my feet, she said. They were having a meeting. When he tucked her into bed, she pulled him down until their foreheads met. Then she whispered, If I forget a color for a while, will you keep it on the shelf for me? He nodded, jaw tight. I'll keep it where it can't get dusty. Promise, she said, because children still believed the word had powers. He didn't give promises he couldn't make. He gave her something else. I'll show up, he said. Every time. That's the best kind, she decided, and closed her eyes. In the living room, the apartment settled around him, pipes ticking a neighbor's television, murmuring a game, the city turning a page. He took out the old wooden box from the top of the closet. The hinges squeaked a memory he wasn't ready for. Inside, the brushes lay sleeping under muslin, their bristles still shaped by a hand that had once known what to do without asking. He lifted one the weight as familiar as a name. He could almost hear the quiet scrape of Hogg's hair over linen, the air changing pitch when paint caught light. His phone buzzed where he'd left it on the counter. A message. He didn't check it yet. On the tiny balcony, he stood in the cold and looked at the city that made a habit of surviving. Somewhere 8 blocks north, a painting waited in a quiet room with a girl he hadn't finished meeting. Somewhere, one room over his daughter dreamed in loud yellow. Elias closed his eyes. The memory arrived uninvited and absolute a laugh in a kitchen, a voice saying, Mix a breath of turquoise into the shadow. It will keep the sorrow from hardening. He opened his eyes to the dark and said out loud to the air that had kept him standing. I know. The phone buzzed again. He read Vivian's message twice. His thumb hovered over the keyboard, then lowered. My way. And no signatures. He pressed send. The reply arrived in seconds. Bring the color you can't mix anymore. He set the phone down and turned back to the box. The brush fit his hand like it had been waiting. In the doorway to her room, Isla's voice drifted out drowsy and sure. Hey, Dad. Yeah. Don't forget to remember. He smiled into the dark. I won't. Then carefully, as if not to wake anything that wasn't ready, he began to lay out the tools of a life he was brave enough to borrow back. The next night, the museum swallowed sound the way a theater does when the curtain's about to lift. Elias swiped in through staff, the badge reader blinking its small green consent, and followed the hush toward the restoration wing. He wasn't late. He'd spent 14 minutes at his apartment door deciding that coming early looked eager and coming late looked scared. He chose on time. He chose exact. Vivian waited in the quiet room with a leather portfolio and a rolled blueprint tube. No heels tonight, low boots, black built for standing. The painting sat where it had sat for years, but the light had changed. They'd tilted the lamps to find the shadows Vermeer liked to hide in. Walter Avery hovered near the table with a clipboard like a shield. "We can proceed," he said without preamble, "if we agree on the following chain of custody logs. Daily environmental readings. No solvents outside the approved list. No unrecorded interventions, and 0 social media." "Good evening to you too," Walter Vivian said, not looking up from the papers she was unrolling. Elias set his canvas bag down and faced them both. "I'll say it," once he said. "My way or not at all?" Walter's pen froze mid-scratch. Vivian's eyes lifted, interested. "Define your way," she said. "No deadlines. I work nights only. No one touches the paint film but me. I choose the medium, the brushes, the order of layers. No cameras, no time-lapse toys. If a mistake happens, I own it, and I fix it. If the color's wrong, we strip it and start again." Walter exhaled like someone testing fire alarms. "You're describing an artist's studio, not a conservation lab." "I'm describing the only way this isn't counterfeit," Elias replied. Vivian tapped the blueprint tube. "And I'm describing the only way this doesn't become a lawsuit. So we meet in the livable middle." She slid a document across the table. "Conservation log stays. Climate data stays. A licensed conservator will check the substrate and stabilize the canvas before you touch it, purely structural. No one touches the face but you. We make macro progress images for the file texture, not content. No public sharing without consent from all parties. If you need materials outside our inventory, we source them. I sign for the costs." She paused, weighing him. "And I want one more thing. Here it comes," he said. "You bring a witness," she said. "Someone who would tell you to stop if the work stops being honest." He had a name before she finished the sentence. "She doesn't stay past 10, he said, "and only if the registrar looks the other way." Walter held up both hands. "This is not daycare. It's not," Elias agreed. "It's a father promising not to lie to his kid about what he does at night." Vivian leaned in. "Call it a pre-session. 30 minutes. She watches prep, not paint. If she crosses a taped line on the floor, the deal is off." Walter looked like a man being asked to sign for a live animal. "If the board asks, tell them Ms. Kane assumed full liability," Vivian said smoothly, "and that your registrar instincts saved us all." He pursed his lips, then ticked a box he hadn't planned to. 30 minutes, he said, "and I'm counting out loud." Elias read the paper, nodded once, and uncapped a pen. He didn't scroll the way he did with phone agreements. He signed with the neat hand of a man who knows lines matter. Vivian countersigned, crisp as rainfall. Walter dated and logged and returned the room to its waiting. Vivian set the portfolio aside. "One more boundary," she said. "Between us." "Good idea," he said. "Say it out loud." "We protect the work first," she said. "Then the people doing the work. We don't confuse admiration with permission." The line pleased him. It landed clean. "Agreed," he said. "And if either of us starts performing instead of paying attention, we take a night off." "Non-negotiable," she said. He drew a chalk square on the floor, a small ritual. "Prep zone. Clean zone," he said. "Nobody tracks their life across that line." Walter actually softened. "Now, you sound like a registrar," he murmured. "I sound like a man who's ruined paintings with his shoes," Elias said. They worked without speaking for a while, the kind of silence that has a job. Walter calibrated the hygrometer. Vivian labeled glass jars with a tidy hand. Turpentine odorless. Distilled water. Rabbit skin glue. Elias examined the support, the old repairs like scar tissue beneath skin. He checked the tension, made micro-adjustments, attached a loose edge of the lining with a bead of adhesive as tender as stitching a torn sleeve. "Tell me what you see," Vivian said from the side, not as a boss testing an employee, but as a painter waking a muscle. He didn't look away from the canvas. "The underdrawing is braver than the surface," he said. "Whoever started this got scared of her own line and hid her under smoke. The light is hungrier than the varnish allowed. The blue you like isn't blue. It's 3 thin greens remembering a blue that isn't there yet. 3 thin greens remembering a blue," she repeated, and the words did something to her posture. "I used to hear like that." "You still do," he said. Walter allowed himself a small cough. "Time," he said, which was his way of saying, "Go get the witness before I lose my nerve." Isla entered like a question with sneakers. Security officer Maria Alvarez had her by the hand, a queen escorting a royal chaos. "I got shaken down at the front desk by an 8-year-old, Maria announced. She had a thesis, 4 exhibits, and a postcard bribe. "I told you it was not a bribe," Isla said, scandalized. "It was a limited edition thank you note." Walter pointed to the tape line. "Feet stay behind the white." Isla planted her toes on the edge like a gymnast at a beam. She took in the room with solemn inventory, the jars, the lamps, her father standing in a square he'd drawn on purpose. "So, this is where the whispers live," she said. "This is where we teach them to speak up," Vivian said, surprising herself with the warmth in her voice. Isla considered Vivian's boots. "You look shorter without the clicky shoes," she observed. Vivian smiled. "I'm taller on paper." Elias knelt so they were level. 30 minutes, he said. "Observing. No touching. No crossing the white line." "I'm excellent at lines," Isla said. "I color outside them on purpose." "Inside?" "For now," he said gently. She took a breath and turned toward the painting. It filled her pupils the way a night sky does. "Hi," she told the girl. "We're here." Elias prepared the palette, egg-shaped wood worn smooth by older nights. He measured out a breath of yellow ochre, a whisper of bone black, a line of viridian that looked too loud until it met air. He reached for the linseed, paused. "May I?" Isla asked already, reaching. "Cap," only he said, handing it over. She twisted, concentrated, handed it back like an offering. Vivienne watched Elias lay a test stroke on a scrap of linen, just oil and pigment, to see how the light lifted when it thinned. It was nothing, and it was everything. The room felt like it leaned in. Isla pointed to 2 small puddles he'd set apart, one blue, leaning, one green leaning. "Those 2 are fighting," she said. "They're negotiating," Elias corrected. "Same difference," she said, then reached to scratch her nose elbow, bumping the edge of the palette. 2 drops slid together shyly, then decided to stay. The color that bloomed wasn't the loud museum blue Vivian saw in campaigns or the green that lives in hospital scrubs. It was a low tide between them, soft as the inside of a shell. Walter inhaled through his teeth. Line, he warned, though she hadn't crossed it. Elias lifted the palette, surprised by his own hands. He tipped the new color toward the lamp. It changed like a thought. "Where did you come from?" he whispered. Isla held up her fingers, clean, obedient, still behind the tape. "Accident," she said. "The good kind." Vivian took 1 step forward without meaning to. "What do you call it?" she asked. Isla didn't hesitate. Remembering, she said, "It's the color that shows up when you don't want to forget." The word went through the room like a slow bell. Elias touched the mix with the corner of a knife and laid the thinnest line on the test linen. Even there, even that small, it carried breath. Walter checked the clock, recovered himself with bureaucracy. 27 minutes, he announced. 3 remaining. 2. Maria Alvarez said, grinning from the doorway. "He rounds down." Elias met Vivian's eyes over the palette. The boundary they'd drawn had not moved, but something else had. It wasn't surrender. It was alignment. "Tomorrow," she said, voice quiet now. "You paint." He nodded. "Tomorrow, I try." Isla leaned into the light without crossing it. "Dad." "Yeah." "Don't make it perfect," she said. "Make it true." He smiled with his teeth, and Vivian watched the room learn a new temperature. Walter cleared his throat like a curtain falling. "Time." Maria winked at Isla. "Back to the kingdom, your limited edition." Isla saluted the painted girl. "We won't forget," she promised, and allowed herself to be escorted out. When the door clicked, the quiet room remembered its name. Elias set the palette down, then lifted it again, unwilling to let the new color sit too long without a question. "Conditions and boundaries," Vivian said softly, as if reading a chapter title. And the first crack he answered. He turned back to the canvas. The girl waited in the smoke of a century. He held the knife over the underpaint like someone about to knock on a door they once called home. Outside somewhere a clock counted an hour he could finally use. Inside, between green and blue, remembering waited. And for the first time the work felt less like trespass and more like permission. They fell into a rhythm no one else could have written. He worked like a craftsman with a confession. She watched like a painter who'd taught herself not to ache. Night after night the quiet room opened its throat and swallowed their disagreements. "Stop trying to charm the varnish," Vivian said, arms crossed, watching Elias feather a translucent glaze across the girl's jawline. "I'm not charming it," he murmured. "I'm lowering its voice." "You're suffocating it," she countered. Vermeer let the light breathe. He set down the brush. "Light isn't a color, Vivian. It's a behavior. Then don't teach it to misbehave." He almost smiled. "There it is. There what is the teacher," he said. "The one you keep in a locked drawer." "Careful," she said, but her tone softened. "That drawer has teeth." He adjusted the angle of the lamp. The smoke blue lifted the cheek, found its curve. She stepped closer, close enough to see the tremor he hid in his left hand when the line mattered. Close enough that her own ribs remembered what it felt like to hold breath for a living. "Why this order?" she asked. "You rewarmed the shadows before you cooled the lights." "Because she's afraid to be seen," he said. "Fear lives in the shadows. You talk to it first. And what do you say?" "Not much," he said. "Mostly, I wait with it." She nodded once as if a private theory had been confirmed. Again. They worked until the clock under Walter's paperwork clicked a disapproving midnight. They argued about medium. She voted for Dammer. He swore by Stand Oil. They sparred over edge quality. She wanted a cleaner occlusion at the collarbone. He said time would make its own decisions. The room learned their weather. At break, Vivian leaned against the work table and watched Elias clean his brushes with the tenderness reserved for small sleeping things. "You build patience like a scaffold," she said. He glanced up. "Patience is the brush no one cleans." "That's quotable," she said. "It's expensive," he replied. The next afternoon, the museum ran like an orchestra tuning. School groups filed past Greek statues. Guards traded jokes in low code. The cafe steamed milk like fog. Vivian came early under the pretext of a planning call and took the long route past staff lockers toward the education studio. She heard the laughter before she saw them. Elias sat at a child-height table, knees politely arguing with gravity. Isla perched beside him, ponytail high and apron 2 sizes too big, tied twice around her waist. Between them, a styrofoam plate palette with 4 small C's, yellow. White, the remembering green-blue from the night before, in a smaller sea of its own. "Why does this brush have a mustache?" Isla asked, holding up a battered fan brush. "It's for clouds," Elias said, "and bad hair days." "I don't have those," she said serenely, dragging the fan through a puddle of white like she was combing a sheep. "Not yet," he said. Vivian stayed in the doorway, unnoticed, learning them the way she learned new acquisitions slowly, then all at once. Elias told a story while he showed Isla how to lift paint from the plate without drowning it. There was a village, he said, where all the houses were the same gray because the paint shop only sold one color. One day, a girl asked the shopkeeper if emotions came in cans. "What did he say?" Isla asked, dabbing a small square of cardboard with gentle taps. He said no, Elias said. So the girl made her own. She took a little hope from the sky, a little calm from the sea, A little forgiveness from an old leaf, and she made a color none of the grown-ups had a name for. Like ours, Isla said, pointing to the green-blue. Exactly like ours. What did they call it? She asked. They didn't, he said. They used it. Vivienne felt something rise in her throat and ache with edges and light. She stepped into the room then, and Isla turned bright. High, clicky shoes, Isla said. Then looked under the table. Oh, not today. Boots, Vivienne said. I made a truce with gravity. Good, Isla said gravely. Gravity sits on your head when you're not looking. Noted. Isla lifted her brush like a conductor. We're painting honest squares, she explained. Dad says squares are hard because there's nowhere to hide. Do you want to paint a brave one? Vivienne hesitated, an old habit, then took the smallest brush, the one that looked like it might hold a secret if asked politely. She dipped it in the remembering color and drew a square that trembled once at the corner and then steadied. Pretty, Isla said approving. True, Elias corrected softly. Isla studied the square, then Vivienne's face. You look at my dad a lot, she observed with the blunt charity of children. Are you going to marry him? He can't cook, Isla. Elias said half-strangled, half-laughing. It's a community service announcement, Isla told Vivienne. He burns toast in 3 languages. Vivienne met Elias's mortified eyes and didn't look away. Thank you for the warning, she said to Isla. I'll bring a fire extinguisher to any hypothetical ceremony. Good, Isla said, satisfied. And a cake that doesn't taste like regret. Deal, Vivienne said, and a smile found her face that didn't care who was counting. Isla added a square above Vivienne's yellow loud as if the sun had been invited and accepted. Then she put her brush down and rubbed her eyes with the backs of 2 fists, small and sudden. Break, Elias said, reading the shift before the color left her cheeks. He touched her wrist the way you ground a kite before wind can be trouble. Water grape, she said automatically, then sighed. Just not so much light. Vivienne moved without thinking, turning the blinds to cut the glare. The room softened a notch. Isla's shoulders lowered. She rested her head briefly against her father's arm as if to remind the world who kept it standing. Better, he asked. Better, she said. Vivienne's phone buzzed. Dr. Patel. She silenced it, then saw the preview, a single line that made the air change temperature. When you're free, sooner updates. 2 words that could empty a stomach, sooner updates. She stayed an extra half hour pretending to read an email while Isla narrated a weather report for colors. When she finally excused herself, Isla waved with paint on 2 fingers. Buy boots. Bring the cake plan. Working on it, Vivienne said. In the hallway, she answered the call. I'm sorry to do this by phone, Dr. Patel said without preface, a kindness disguised as efficiency. But I'd rather you have information than wait for the next slot. I'm listening. The latest readings show progression, Dr. Patel said. I want to move Isla's procedure up. We're not talking months anymore. We're talking weeks and, if we can, days. The earlier we intervene now, the more of her color we can protect. Tell me what you need, Vivienne said. A family prepared quickly, Dr. Patel said, and a hospital that moves faster than its own paperwork. I can make calls, Vivienne said, already seeing the list in her mind, the favors she could cash, the doors, she could open the ways, she could be useful that weren't performative. Dr. Patel paused. Vivienne, this is a fixable problem with the right timing. I don't use the word lightly, but time is the hinge. Then we close it, Vivienne said. She ended the call and leaned her forehead against the cool wall for a 5 count. When she lifted her head, she didn't adjust her mask. She let the room see her bare face and made a decision she would later recognize as a fault line. That night, the quiet room held a new urgency. The remembering color looked different under the lamps as if it had heard, too. Elias arrived with a thermos of coffee and a silence that meant work. Vivienne told him in 2 sentences and a breath. He nodded once and set the bristle to the task of making time visible. Where do we begin? She asked, voice low. Where she's pretending not to be afraid, he said, touching the shadow beside the mouth. Fear leaves fingerprints. They moved like they'd practiced for this their whole lives. He mixed. She steadied the lamp. Walter pretended to tidy a shelf and stayed an hour past his rule. The girl on the canvas began to choose her own angles. Edges softened where shame had hardened. The throat found its temperature. The eye that had been merely implied looked up and for a beat almost recognized them. Round midnight, Vivian caught Elias studying the tiny test strip where the remembering color lived. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's why it's honest." She turned the lamp 2 degrees. He nodded. They both exhaled. "Do you ever wish you'd never stopped?" she asked, as if small talk could hold steel. "Every day," he said. "And today, I'm glad I did. Why?" "Because stopping taught me how to start for the right reasons," he said. "You don't get that lesson cheap." A quiet settled, stunned and warm. Then his phone buzzed across the table with a message that pulled all the air out of the room. Vivian read his face before he read the screen. "Is it Dr. Patel?" he said, and opened it. The words were brief, merciless, kind. "Acute episode today. I'd like to admit Isla tomorrow for pre-op. We move as soon as anesthesia clears her window." He steadied himself on the edge of the table. Not a collapse. A bracing. Vivian put her hand flat on the wood near his not-touching lending heat. "Tell me what to do. Help me finish this layer," he said. "And then help me get her there." They worked without speaking. The brush carried one more mercy into the skin. The knife teased a reflection out of a shadow that had been stubborn all week. When he finally rinsed the bristles and set them aside, the girl on the easel looked less like a rumor and more like someone about to answer. He capped the jars. She logged the time. Walter flipped the deadbolt like a blessing. In the corridor, under the watch of lights that never sleep, Vivian said it out loud, the truth neither of them could paint around. "We're out of later," she said. Elias nodded once, a vow more than a movement. "Then we use now." The hospital's waiting room was all fluorescent glare and plastic seats, the kind of place where time didn't pass so much as circle the block and come back looking tired. Elias sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, watching Isla through the open door of the pediatric wing as she colored on a clipboard, her small fingers gripping the marker with stubborn precision. Vivian stood beside him, a paper cup of coffee cooling in her hands. "The surgery. Dr. Patel said it's her best shot at keeping most of her vision," she said quietly. "But it's not cheap, not even close." Elias's eyes didn't leave Isla. "I know." She hesitated. There were ways to say this that would keep her dignity neat and folded, but neat didn't help anyone now. "I'll cover it," she said. That got him to look at her. "What?" "All of it. The surgery, the hospital stay rehab, the best follow-up care money can buy." She took a slow breath. "On one condition." His jaw tightened. "And what's that?" "The painting?" she said. "When it's finished, it's mine. I'll sign over the funds today. No questions asked." He stared at her like she'd just offered to buy his daughter's heartbeat. "That painting isn't mine to give. You're the artist," she countered. "Of course it's yours." He shook his head. "No, it belongs to her, Isla. It always has. I'm just holding it for her." Vivian swallowed. "Elias? I'm not trying to rob her. You just want to own the only thing she'll inherit from her mother." He cut in his voice low but sharp. She flinched but didn't look away. "I want to save her sight, and I want her to grow up knowing her father didn't trade her mother's memory for a hospital bill." His words were ice, but the pain beneath them was molten. They sat in silence, the hum of vending machines and distant elevator chimes filling the space between them. In the hallway, a nurse walked by, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. From inside the room, Isla's voice floated out, bright, unfiltered. "Dad, can you come check my cloud?" "It looks like it's thinking about raining." Elias stood, but Vivian reached out, stopping him with a hand on his sleeve. "Let me," she said softly. She stepped into the room. Hila was sitting cross-legged on the bed, a half-finished picture in her lap, pale yellow sun, a lopsided house, and a cloud painted in 2 different blues. "Hi, Boots." Isla greeted, a small grin tugging at her mouth. "My cloud's confused." Vivian crouched beside her. "Maybe it's not confused. Maybe it's just deciding what kind of day to be." Hila tilted her head. "Like you?" Vivian blinked. "What do you mean I heard you talking to Dad?" Isla said, simply, still shading the cloud. You want the picture in the museum. Dad wants it for me. If I lose my eyes... Dad loses his colors, right? Vivian's throat tightened. Isla? So maybe you could give him colors back? The little girl said, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. Then everybody wins. Vivian felt something crack inside a soundless splinter through the walls she'd built. She reached out, smoothing a stray hair from Isla's forehead. And how would I do that? Easy, Isla said with a shrug. You already make the room warmer when you walk in. You just have to do that, everywhere. Vivian laughed, but it wasn't humor, it was something more fragile. You're a dangerous negotiator, you know that, Isla grinned. Dad says dangerous is just brave with more colors. The words hit harder than they should have. Vivian stood slowly, her chest feeling heavier than when she'd walked in. Back in the hallway, Elias was leaning against the doorframe. She's good at making people feel cornered, he said. She's good at telling the truth, Vivian replied. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elias added, the answer's still no. Vivian didn't argue. She just nodded once and walked away, heels clicking against the tile. That night, she sat alone in her penthouse. The city glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, each light a cold little jewel. She'd built this view from nothing. Every deal, every calculated risk, every sleepless night, a brick in the tower she lived in. But for the first time, the skyline looked gray. She thought of Isla's voice. You already make the room warmer when you walk in. She thought of Elias bent over the canvas with a devotion that didn't need applause. She thought of herself sitting at the head of a boardroom table signing deals that never once made anyone's world brighter except her own. Her reflection in the glass looked pale against the city's lights. She realized with a strange, unshakable certainty she'd been living in a palette of neutrals. Safe, controlled, predictable, a grayscale life in a world made for color. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she could stand it anymore. The call came mid-morning, slicing through the quiet of Vivian's office like a knife through silk. She had been staring at her inbox, not reading, just watching the blinking cursor, thinking of Isla's cloud drawing. Vivian said the clipped voice of Walter Avery, the museum's director. We need to talk about the Vermeer. She straightened in her chair. What about it? It's behind schedule. I've seen the progress reports. More's taking far too long. We have the gala exhibition in 8 weeks, and the board is breathing down my neck. I can't risk this hanging in limbo because you took a personal gamble on a janitor. Her voice was cool, but the temperature in her chest dropped. He's not a gamble. He's the only one who can do it right. Walter's sigh was sharp. Vivian, this isn't about sentiment. It's about deadlines and donors. I'm bringing in Alexandra Moretti from the Florence Restoration Institute. She can finish it on time and she's internationally certified. Moore's out. No. The single syllable sat heavy between them. Walter's tone hardened. It's not your call anymore. If you want the museum's partnership on your brand's upcoming campaign, you'll step aside and let me handle this. Otherwise, she cut him off. Otherwise, I lose a marketing tie-in. Noted. But you should also note that replacing Moore will mean you lose me and the 6-figure sponsorship I promised for your precious gala. There was silence on the line. Then a cold, You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment, Vivian. She almost laughed. Maybe that's the first thing I've gotten right in years. And she hung up. She didn't have time to feel victorious. Her phone buzzed again this time, Elias's name on the screen. When she answered, she heard the panic in his voice before he even said the words. It's Isla. She's... Vivian, she's in the ER. By the time she reached the hospital, the air felt too thin, the walls too white. She found Elias in a small family waiting area, his hands still speckled with faint paint, his shirt untucked like he'd run out the door without thinking. They think it's a complication from her condition, he said, voice low and rough. Fluid buildup behind the retina. They need to run tests, maybe operate sooner than planned. Vivian sat beside him. Is she awake? He shook his head. They sedated her. She was scared. He scrubbed a hand over his face. I should have noticed sooner. She said she had headaches, but I thought it was just the light in the studio. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, but the words felt like paper shields against a flood. Minutes dragged, and he didn't move. At some point, she realized his hands weren't just speckled with paint, they were trembling. "Elias," she said gently, "what about the painting?" His head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing. "What about it? You left it in the middle of a restoration. The solvents." "I don't care if it rots," he said, cutting her off, the words biting. "She's in there. That's the only thing that matters." There was nothing to argue with in that. Later, she walked down the hallway toward Isla's room, her heels muffled against the waxed floor. She stopped short when she saw him through the glass. Elias sat slumped in a chair beside the bed, his forearms resting on his knees, head bowed so low it nearly touched the edge of the mattress. His hands were tangled in his hair, and though she couldn't hear him, his shoulders told the story. This was not the posture of a man thinking, but of a man breaking. She had never seen him like that. Elias Moore was flint-hard, spare, sparking only when struck. But here, with the dim monitor glow tracing the lines of his face, he looked undone. And for the first time she felt the truth like a bruise forming under the skin. This was bigger than any deal, bigger than any canvas. This was a man holding on to his child the way a drowning man holds on to air. Vivienne stayed in the doorway, her hand tightening around the frame. She didn't speak. She didn't step in. She just stood there silent, knowing something had shifted inside him. Inside her, inside the invisible thread pulling all three of them together. And she couldn't help but wonder if in the battle closing in on them, they were the ones who needed rescuing most of all. The elevator doors opened with a muted chime spilling Vivienne into the 29th floor of Kane International. The scent of white lilies from the marble reception desk hung faint in the air, but it did nothing to hide the sterility, the perfect, curated emptiness. Her heels echoed down the polished hallway past framed covers of fashion magazines bearing her name. Normally, they were trophies. Today, they looked like mirrors to a person she barely recognized. She reached her office and stopped in the doorway. The space was immaculate glass desk leather chair, panoramic skyline view. Yet the word that came to her mind was colorless. It wasn't just about paint or fabric. It was an absence of pulse, of warmth, of Isla's kind of light. She let her coat slip off her shoulders, draping it over the chair. Her eyes drifted to the corner where a crystal vase held orchids so white they almost vanished into the walls. And then, like a small stone skipping across her mind, came Isla's voice from that afternoon in the studio. "Do you have colors at your company, Miss Vivienne?" The question had made her laugh then. Now it landed differently, because if she was honest, the answer was no, not a single one. By noon, the boardroom was filled. 12 executives in tailored suits waiting for their CEO to discuss quarterly projections. Walter Avery, somehow already in a seat, gave her a curt nod, his presence a reminder of the battle she'd been losing. She didn't bother sitting. "Before we begin," she said, her voice cutting through the low chatter, "I have something to say." Lorenzo from finance glanced at his watch. "Can it wait until after?" "No," she said simply. "Can't." She stepped forward, letting her hands rest on the edge of the table. "I've spent the last decade building Kane International into a name that wins contracts, graces runways, and fills our shareholders' pockets. But somewhere along the way, I started designing in grayscale, and not just the clothes, everything. My office, my days, my life." There was a shifting of chairs, an undercurrent of unease. She looked straight at Walter. "If being human costs me this chair, I'll build a better one. Somewhere colors don't have to hide." A pause, heavy and still as if the words had frozen the air. "I'm resigning as CEO, effective immediately." The room erupted questions. Disbelief, outrage. But Vivienne didn't flinch. She straightened every inch of her frame, calm. "You'll survive without me, and I'll survive without you, but I won't survive without color." Walter's jaw tightened. "Vivienne, this is a mistake. You're throwing away influence resources." She cut in with the faintest smile. "Some resources aren't worth the price they ask." The city air hit her like a shock when she stepped outside 20 minutes later. It was cold, but clean, and for the first time in years, she wasn't in a rush to be anywhere. Her driver opened the car door, but she waved him off. "I'll walk." She needed the rhythm of her heels on the pavement, the anonymity of the crowd. She needed to feel the weight of the decision settle into her bones before she acted on the next one. And she already knew what that next one was. That evening, Vivian sat at her kitchen island with a glass of water and her phone scrolling through her contacts. These were names that could move millions with a call people who owed her favors measured in headlines and signed checks. She started dialing. Not for her, not for her brand, for Isla. By midnight, the money was secured. It moved quietly through channels that would never link back to her. The hospital would receive an anonymous donation covering every cent of the surgery, post-op care, and recovery therapy. She sat back, exhaling slowly. There would be no press release, no plaque on the wall. Isla would never know. Elias would never know. That anonymity wasn't modesty. It was the only way to make sure it wasn't a transaction, but a gift. For the first time in a long time, Vivian felt light. Not the brittle light of a flashbulb, but the warm, steady glow of something honest. Outside her window, the city lights shimmered like a scattered palette. She thought of Isla's question again about colors at her company. Maybe she didn't have them there, but she could start somewhere else. Somewhere the colors wouldn't just be in the walls or on the runway, but in people's lives. She poured the rest of her water into the sink, set down the glass, and whispered to the empty apartment almost like a promise, "It's time to paint differently." The restoration room was silent when Elias stepped inside, the faint scent of turpentine and aged varnish wrapping around him like an old memory. The tall windows let in a soft gray light, catching on dust motes that swirled lazily in the air. For days, the easel had stood abandoned, the half-finished Vermeer staring back at no one, its girl frozen mid-expression waiting for someone to give her back her voice. Elias dropped his bag on the workbench. His hand hovered over the paintbrush lying exactly where he'd left it, bristles stiff with dried pigment. He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. He could almost hear Isla's giggle, the way she'd say, "Bo, you make colors sound like they're alive." Then another memory, the hospital monitor beeping in the background, her small hand in his, and the bone-deep fear that he might lose her. Now she was in recovery. The surgery had gone forward. He didn't know who had made it possible, he only knew that some unseen hand had opened a door he'd thought was locked forever. It was time to keep his promise to her. He dipped the brush into the first wash of color, steadying his wrist. The girl's face in the painting slowly regained its softness, each layer breathing life back into her. His strokes were careful, almost reverent, as if speaking directly to the spirit of the long-lost work. But as the hours slipped away, Elias began to deviate from the script history had given him. Behind the figure's shoulder, he painted a hint of open space, then a meadow, the suggestion of wind bending tall grass. By midnight, the idea had bloomed fully. He would give the painting not just its original soul, but his own truth. He reached for a vibrant pigment, one he rarely touched, a rare ultramarine laced with a trace of viridian. It caught the light, differently shimmering with an almost impossible depth, the same blue that lived in Isla's eyes. As he brushed it into the field, he saw her, his daughter, not the model Vermeer had once imagined, but Isla herself, laughing as she ran barefoot through the meadow, hair wild in the wind, sunlight threading through every strand. His throat tightened. That color wasn't just hers, it had been her mother's too. He remembered the first time he'd noticed it, the day she'd sat in the corner of his studio sketching him while pretending to read. Her smile when she caught him looking. The way the light hit her face that made him swear he'd spend his life chasing that shade. The meadow grew under his hand, richer, brighter. This was no longer just a restoration, it was a bridge between past and present grief and hope loss and what still remained. He worked through the night. Every so often he'd pause to stretch his fingers, feeling the ache in his shoulders, the grit of exhaustion in his eyes. But the fatigue never reached his resolve. He painted Vivian too, not literally, but in the way the light spilled over the scene, warm and deliberate, like the way she'd once stood beside him at the easel, offering a comment that was half critique, half encouragement. In the subtle lift of the girl's chin there was Vivian's unshakable defiance. In the sweep of the brush along the sky, there was the space Vivian had made for him to breathe again. The girl in the painting was all of them, Isla, her mother. Vivian, woven into one eternal moment where the colors would never fade. By dawn, the city outside was stirring awake. The restoration room smelled of coffee and oil paint. Lias stood back, brush limp in his fingers, and just looked. The lost girl had been found again, but she was no longer lost. A faint knock came at the door. It was Walter, the museum's manager, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been at it all night," he said quietly, almost respectfully. Elias glanced at him. "Some things can't wait." Walter stepped inside, studying the painting. His brows lifted, but he said nothing for a long while. Then, with a slight nod, he murmured, "She's more than restored. She's alive." Elias didn't answer. He just turned back to the easel, his fingers brushing the frame as though sealing a promise. That evening, the last rays of sunlight slanted through the tall windows, setting the blues and greens in the meadow alight. Elias cleaned his brushes, lined them up with precision, and covered the easel with a protective cloth. Tomorrow was the exhibition. For a moment he rested his hand on the canvas beneath the cloth, whispering into the quiet, "For you, Isla. For all the colors you've kept alive in me." The museum's grand hall had never looked more alive. Chandeliers spilled gold over polished marble floors, and the air shimmered with the low hum of anticipation. The city's art elite mingled with journalists, critics, and the kind of people who didn't attend events so much as they were events themselves. In the center, hidden beneath a deep velvet cover, stood the easel that held the lost girl. Elias arrived, quietly slipping in through a side entrance. He wore a simple dark suit, pressed but unpretentious, the kind of attire that didn't beg to be noticed. His hands, though scrubbed clean, still carried the faint scent of linseed oil, as if the painting itself lingered on his skin. Vivian was already there, poised near the stage in a sleek black gown that caught the light in every movement. When she spotted him, she didn't wave, didn't call out. She just gave the smallest nod, the kind that carried weight. Then, across the room, Elias saw her Isa walking slowly beside a nurse, her little hand clutching a pale green scarf. The hospital bracelet still circled her wrist, but her eyes, newly freed from bandages days ago, were bright and searching. When she spotted him, her face lit up like sunrise. "Beau," she called the word, tumbling across the space between them. He bent down to catch her in his arms. She smelled faintly of the lavender shampoo the nurses used her cheeks cool from the evening air. "You made it," he murmured, voice thick. "Of course," she said, wrinkling her nose. "You think I'd miss seeing the thing you've been staring at more than me?" He laughed low and unsteady, and for a moment the grand hall around them faded to nothing. The museum director took the microphone, his voice booming across the hall. "Tonight, we unveil not just a restoration, but a resurrection. A work once thought lost has been brought back by the hands of someone who sees art not just as pigment and canvas, but as the keeper of memory." Elias felt the eyes of the room shift toward him. He kept his gaze on Isla, his anchor in the sudden tide of attention. The director gestured toward the easel. "Ladies and gentlemen, the lost girl." The velvet cloth slipped away. Gasps rippled through the hall, not polite, measured appreciation, but the involuntary sound people make when their hearts forget to keep pace. Isola's fingers tightened around Elias's. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on the painting. The girl in the artwork stood bathed in soft light, the delicate folds of her dress catching whispers of shadow. Behind her, a meadow stretched endlessly alive with wind and color. And there, in the far field, was a small figure mid-run hair, tangled in the breeze eyes the exact shade of Isla's. Ila's voice came in a hush, but it cut through the room like a bell. "Beau dep hon trinyo kukan." "Dad, you painted better than my memory." Lia swallowed hard. "Maybe because I painted with yours." Silence fell over the hall. Not empty silence, but the kind heavy with reverence. People didn't shuffle closer. They simply stood rooted, as if moving would break the fragile magic that bound them to the scene. A critic near the front dabbed her eyes. A cameraman lowered his lens just for a second to breathe. Even the director, so often a man of speeches, found no words. Vivienne approached slowly, her heels making no sound on the marble. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't pose for the photographers angling for a shot. Her eyes stayed on Elias. She stopped beside him, her presence quiet but certain. No words passed between them, none were needed. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Her palm was warm, steady. His grip answered in kind. In that moment, the applause began, not polite clapping, but a swell that seemed to rise from somewhere deep in the room, gathering force until it filled every corner of the hall. Elias didn't turn to face it. He stood there with Isla and Vivienne, looking at the painting, his hand in hers, and thought some colors. They don't fade. They stay. The applause from the exhibition had faded into the hum of memory, but its echo followed Elias into the days that came after. It wasn't just that the painting had been a success, it was the way people lingered in front of it, the way they whispered to one another as if they were afraid to break something sacred. 3 days later, Elias stood in a sunlit room at the museum, a place they'd offered him as a workspace for future collaborations. The table before him was littered with sketches, grant proposals, and a stack of letters from people who had been moved by the lost girl. Vivienne entered without knocking. She'd traded her black gown for a soft cream sweater and jeans, but the quiet authority in her presence was unchanged. She carried a folder in her hands. "I've been thinking," she said, setting the folder down, "about Isla, about that painting, about everything." Elias gave a small smile. "That's a lot of thinking." She didn't smile back, not yet. "I think it's time we build something bigger than a painting." Inside the folder were blueprints not of buildings but of ideas, drafts for a non-profit that would bring art programs to hospitals and schools with a special focus on children facing long-term medical care. At the top, in Vivienne's crisp handwriting, was the name, "The Color That Stayed Foundation." Elias read it aloud, letting the words settle in the air. "The color that stayed." "It's not just about keeping colors alive on a canvas," Vivienne said. "It's about keeping them alive here." She touched her chest right over her heart. "For kids who need something bright when the world gets gray." That afternoon, Isla was brought in by her nurse. She was walking better now, a little more steady each day, the bandages gone from her eyes. She took in the room, the papers, the designs. "What's all this?" she asked, hopping up onto a chair. "It's a plan," Elias told her. "A way to share art with other kids, maybe even teach them how to make their own colors." Isla's grin was instant. "Can I help?" Vivienne leaned forward. "Actually, Isla, we were thinking, you could be the keeper of the colors." Isla tilted her head, considering it like a serious business proposition. "Keeper of colors. That sounds like a superhero. Do I get a cape?" "You can have 3, Vivienne replied without missing a beat. The first event was held in the children's ward of St. Jude's. The hospital had converted a conference room into a pop-up art studio. Long tables were lined with jars of paint, stacks of brushes, and thick sheets of paper. Some of the kids wore hospital gowns, others pajamas, but all of them looked at the supplies like they were treasure. Elias moved among the tables, showing a boy in a wheelchair how to mix yellow and blue into the perfect green. Vivienne knelt beside a girl who hadn't spoken all morning, coaxing her into drawing a sun with the fattest, happiest rays. Isla, small but commanding, stood at the front of the room. She showed the other kids how to swirl colors together like ice cream and declared that no one was allowed to say, "I can't draw," under her watch. Halfway through the session, a familiar face appeared in the doorway, Walter, the museum's longtime curator. He didn't step in right away. He stood there, arms crossed, his gaze moving over the room. When Elias finally noticed him, he walked over. "Didn't expect to see you here," Elias said. Walter shrugged, but there was a softness in his eyes. "I came to return something." From behind his back, he produced a slender, elegant wooden case. Inside was a set of sable brushes, their handles polished to a soft sheen. "These belonged to a restorer I trained with years ago," Walter said. "I've been holding on to them, waiting for someone who would use them for more than just fixing cracks." Elias took the case, his throat tightening. "Thank you," he said simply. Walter nodded toward Isla. "Looks like you've already found your next masterpiece." As the class wrapped up, the tables were covered in wet, dripping rainbows of every shape and size. Some paintings were careful and neat, others were joyful explosions of color. Isla held up her own, a swirling field of blue and green with a bright streak of gold cutting through the middle. This, she announced to the group, is what it looks like when colors don't run away. Vivian caught Elias's gaze across the room. There was pride there, yes, but also something more, something quieter, more dangerous, the kind of feeling that grew roots when you weren't looking. When they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Vivian walked beside him. You know, she said, I built an empire out of fabric and glass, but this feels more real than all of it. Elias looked at her, the city lights flickering in her eyes. Maybe because this isn't about what you own, it's about what you give. Vivian smiled, then a rare, unguarded smile that softened every sharp edge she carried. If being human costs me everything else, I think I can live with that. They stood there for a moment, not needing to fill the silence. Somewhere inside, Isla's laughter echoed down the hallway, and it was enough. The late spring sun poured over the city like honey, turning every rooftop into gold. On the museum's rooftop garden, the tables had been cleared, the easels set up, and the jars of paint lined in rows like soldiers waiting for a gentler kind of battle. The color that stayed. Foundation had chosen this as their first outdoor class, an open sky, fresh air, and a view of the skyline that looked as though the city itself had decided to lean in and listen. Isla was in the center, her hair catching the light in fine copper strands, a streak of turquoise paint already on her cheek. She leaned over her palette, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Beside her, Vivian knelt in linen pants and an old white shirt sleeves rolled, helping a boy mix a stubborn shade of purple. Elias stood a few feet away watching them. His hands were smeared with cerulean and ochre, his shirt cuff dabbed with vermilion where Isla had swatted him for interfering. He'd learned not to correct her when she was in her element, just like her mother. "Okay, everyone," Isla called out, clapping her paint-speckled hands. "Rule number 1, no one gets to say, 'I'm bad at art, you just haven't found your favorite color yet.'" The group laughed, parents included. A little girl in a wheelchair raised her hand timidly. "What if I don't know what my favorite color is?" Isla's eyes softened. "Then, today's the day you meet it." She reached for a jar, swirled together 2 impossible shades, and handed the brush over. Sometimes colors are shy until you mix them with the right friend. Vivian's lips curled into a smile so unguarded it surprised even her. She glanced toward Elias. He caught her looking. She didn't look away. They worked for an hour, the air buzzing with chatter and laughter. The rooftop smelled of sunlight and acrylic paint. Somewhere in the corner, Walter, the museum curator, sat quietly sketching the scene on a small pad. He didn't intend to show anyone, but his hands moved almost involuntarily. When the last of the brushes were rinsed and the canvases set to dry, Isla wandered to the edge of the garden where Vivian stood looking out over the skyline. "Ko beat kong," Isla said, leaning on the railing. "Bove mao, nyung kan moi la nguyu na." Vivian knelt so they were eye level. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "You keep more than just colors." Her hand gently brushed Isla's hair back. "You keep people from forgetting what they're here for." Elias walked up then, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's all this serious talk about?" Trade Secret Isla said, grinning. "You wouldn't get it, Dad." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Oh, try me." "Nope," Isla said, tucking her hands behind her back. "It's for the Keeper of Colors Club only. Maybe if you pass the test." "And what's the test?" Isla looked at Vivian, who smirked. "Apparently, it's learning how to cook," she said. "She's still convinced you can't." Elias laughed, shaking his head. "Some clubs have impossible entry requirements." The sun began to dip, casting the rooftop in a wash of rose-gold light. Kids darted between the easels, their laughter like bright brushstrokes in the warm evening air. Elias stood beside Vivian, both of them watching Isla move from child to child, offering encouragement as if it were her second language. "You know," Vivian said quietly, "I thought I was building this foundation for them." She nodded toward the children. "But I think maybe I was building it for me." Elias turned to her. "Sometimes the colors we save aren't for the canvas." Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "And sometimes they're people." For a moment, the air between them held something too full to name. Walter walked over, then, holding his sketchbook open. On the page was a simple but striking charcoal drawing, Elias, Vivienne, and Isla standing in a triangle of sunlight surrounded by children painting their laughter drawn in curved, living lines. "I thought," Walter said, his voice low, "you might want to keep this, before the colors fade in my memory." Elias took the book, gently tracing the lines with his gaze. "They won't fade," he said, glancing at Isla, "not with her around." As the last of the parents began to gather their children, Isla bounced over, her eyes lit with something beyond the day's work. "We should do this every week," she declared. Elias chuckled. "Every week, huh? That's a lot of paint." "Good," Isla said, grabbing both their hands. "The world needs more." Vivienne's fingers tightened slightly around Elias's. He didn't pull away. From above, the scene was a living painting. Canvases drying in the golden light, a city sprawling beyond, and at the center, 3 figures standing close together, their shadows mingling until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The wind carried Isla's laughter across the rooftop. It mingled with the hum of the city, the glow of the setting sun, and the quiet truth that none of them said out loud: some colors never wash away. And sometimes they stay because someone holds them safe. And maybe that's the secret of colors. They're not just shades we see with our eyes. They're the moments we keep alive in our hearts. Moments of courage, of love, of choosing to stay when walking away would be easier. If this story has found a color in you, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments so we can see how far these colors travel. And if you believe the world could use more stories like this, stories that remind us of the beauty we can create together, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Every click, every share helps keep these colors alive. Thank you truly for giving your time, your heart, and your ears to this journey. Until our next story, keep the colors close,